A stalemate in Ogdensburg keeps the city preliminary budget there from getting accepted. 7 News reporter Sean Brenda learns what each side of the stalemate would like.
Ogdensburg needs to have a preliminary budget passed by October 31st. Tuesday night, council was split 3-3. There's one regular council meeting left to get it done. 3 councilors, John Reich, Bill Dillabaugh, and Stephen Fisher, wouldn't pass the preliminary budget, saying they want meetings to make changes to the spending plan before they pass it, including bringing down sewer and water rate increases.
If we pass her budget, and for some reason we go down and we can't make these changes down the road, then it reverts back to her budget. And that happened once before to us, and it's not going to happen again.
You really only have one opportunity to negotiate, and that's until October 31st, where you accept or modify the budget.
Meanwhile, councilors Dan Scamperly, Mike Powers, and Mayor Mike Scully point out passing the preliminary budget is procedural. After it's accepted, budget work sessions are held to make changes, and then a final budget vote is taken in November.
In order to begin workshops and things like that, let's just start the process by passing the preliminary budget. Without passing the preliminary budget, there's no sense in talking.
They want to tweak the preliminary budget before accepting the preliminary budget and then just formulate a budget. That's not what the charter calls for, and I'm a procedural guy.
Meanwhile, the 3-3 stalemate has interim city manager Andrea Smith reminding council by December 1st a final budget needs to be approved, and it needs to override the state tax cap. She warns a deal that doesn't would deal a blow to the city.
The majority of our budget goes to personnel. So in order to realize or overcome that deficit, there would be serious cuts across the board.
Sean Brenda, 7 News.